The night shift at St. Mercy Hospital was never quiet, but lately, something felt wrong. Nurse Claire had worked here for years, but in the last month, a heavy presence lingered in the halls, an unnatural stillness between the sounds of beeping monitors and distant footsteps. Staff whispered about room 306. A patient had died there weeks ago, but some swore they still heard him coughing in the dead of night. It started small, medication carts rolling by themselves, lights flickering even after maintenance had checked the wiring. But then, things escalated. One night, Claire was reviewing charts when the intercom crackled to life. "Nice, help me," a hoarse voice wheezed through the speaker. Her stomach twisted. The voice was barely above a whisper, but it was enough to send a chill down her spine. She checked the call log. Room 306. Her hands trembled as she walked down the dim corridor, each step echoing unnaturally. The closer she got, the colder the air became. She reached the door and froze. It was slightly open. Inside, the bed was empty. The room had been unoccupied since the patient died. Then she saw them, wet footprints leading from the bed to the door. The scent of antiseptic mixed with something foul, something rotting. Her breathing hitched. A whisper tickled her ear. "You let me die." Claire spun around, but the hallway was empty. The lights buzzed louder, then flickered off entirely. The darkness swallowed her. A cold, clammy hand grabbed her wrist. She screamed. The next morning, security found her collapsed outside room 306, her hair streaked white, eyes wide in terror. When they played back the security footage, she was alone the entire time. But before she lost consciousness, Claire swore she heard the heart monitor in the empty room beep once. Just once. The next few weeks at St. Mercy were filled with whispers and rumors. Nurse Claire had been taken off night shifts, her sanity hanging by a thread, and the hospital staff began to avoid room 306. But the strange occurrences didn't stop. Patients on the floor started mentioning seeing someone standing at the foot of their beds during the night. One night, a patient named James, who was recovering from surgery, reported a figure in a hospital gown standing in the doorway, watching him. But when the nurses rushed in, the room was empty. They couldn't explain it. But then, things started happening to Dr. Harris. He was a seasoned surgeon, used to the pressures of the job, but nothing had prepared him for this. It started when he was working late on a complicated procedure. The lights began flickering. He paused, checking the equipment, thinking it was a malfunction. But when the lights went out entirely, he felt a coldness creep over him, like something was watching. He checked the time, 1:47 a.m. His phone buzzed with a message. "They know you're here." Chilled, he walked down the sterile, white hallways to check on his patients. As he passed room 306, the door creaked open on its own. The temperature dropped sharply. Dr. Harris didn't know why, but something drew him inside. The room was colder than he'd ever felt before. The smell of decay was almost overwhelming. And there, standing in the corner of the room, was the figure, a man in a hospital gown, pale as a ghost, staring at him with dead, empty eyes. Dr. Harris turned to run but felt his feet freeze to the ground. The figure moved closer, its face twisting into a grotesque smile. The man's lips moved, but no sound came out. And then Dr. Harris felt it, a sharp pain in his chest, as though something cold was pressing against his heart. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on, and the figure was gone. Dr. Harris couldn't explain what happened in room 306 that night. He tried to brush it off, telling himself it was exhaustion. But deep down, he knew something was terribly wrong. The days that followed were filled with unease. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, followed, even when he was alone in the operating room. One evening, he confided in Nurse Sarah, who had worked at St. Mercy for years. She listened intently before lowering her voice to a whisper. "You're not the first. Others have seen him. People have died here. People who were never supposed to die. Some say it's the spirit of the man who died in room 306. Others say it's something else, something darker." That night, Dr. Harris couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the words of Nurse Sarah echoing in his mind. "A part of him knew that room 306 wasn't just haunted. It was cursed, and it wasn't going to stop until it took more lives. At 2:13 a.m., the hospital's power went out again. The emergency lights flickered on, casting an eerie glow through the halls. Dr. Harris, now wide awake, found himself drawn to room 306 once again. It was as if the room itself was calling him. When he stepped inside, the temperature dropped, and the air became thick, suffocating. The door slammed shut behind him. He turned to face the bed, but there was no one there. The bed was empty, but on the floor were fresh footprints, wet, dripping, as though someone had walked through a puddle of water. He reached out for the light switch, but the light overhead buzzed and then went out. That's when he saw it. In the corner of the room, standing just like it had before, was the figure of the man in the hospital gown. But this time, his face wasn't empty. His eyes were wide, bulging, with a look of sheer terror, and his mouth moved soundlessly. Dr. Harris took a step back, his heart pounding in his chest. He tried to run, but his legs wouldn't move. The figure began to whisper, its voice raspy and broken. "You're next. You're next." Suddenly, the lights flickered back on, and the figure was gone. Dr. Harris collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. He scrambled to get out of the room, but as he reached for the door, he felt something cold and damp wrap around his wrist, pulling him back. A voice whispered directly into his ear, "You're not leaving." The next morning, the staff found him, his body cold and lifeless, sprawled in front of room 306. There was no sign of a struggle, no wounds. Only one thing was certain. His face was twisted in an expression of pure terror, and his eyes were wide open, staring at the door of the cursed room. Room 306 was sealed after that, but the whispers never stopped. And those who worked at St. Mercy Hospital knew, some curses never die.
I've been working at St. Margaret's Hospital for almost 5 years, and in all that time, I've never seen anything like Dr. Gabriel Albright. He wasn't some mysterious new doctor who appeared out of nowhere. No, he'd been here for months. I'd heard about his reputation before he even arrived. He was known for being a genius, but also for his unconventional methods. Some of the senior doctors whispered about him, especially after he began treating the most hopeless cases. Cancer patients with no chance of survival suddenly leave the hospital completely healed. It seemed too good to be true. At first, I wasn't sure what to think. I'm a nurse, and I've seen a lot over the years, but even I couldn't deny that something was different about Dr. Albright. There was always this calm about him, like he knew exactly what he was doing. And his treatments, they worked. But there was something unsettling about the whole thing. He never let anyone accompany him when he treated patients. He'd go into rooms alone, and hours later, the patients would be better. Not just better, better in a way that didn't make sense. I'd hear the other nurses talking about it, whispering in the hallways. How could one doctor, with no medical equipment that was any different from the rest of us, cure the incurable? But the most disturbing thing? I'd start seeing fewer and fewer patients in the morgue. The hospital was always busy, and bodies usually piled up pretty quickly. But after Dr. Albright came in, the morgue seemed emptier. It wasn't just that the patients were getting better. No, something else was going on. One night, I decided I'd had enough of the uncertainty. I had to see for myself what was really happening behind those closed doors. I followed him after his last round of the evening. He walked with his usual quiet confidence, heading toward the back of the hospital. I kept my distance, my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to stay out of sight. I watched him disappear into the supply room. The door wasn't fully closed, and from where I stood, I could see the faint glow of fluorescent light leaking out. I waited, my curiosity eating at me. Something felt wrong, but I couldn't explain it. I knew I needed answers. I took a step closer, and then I saw it, the body on the table. At first, I thought I had to be imagining things. The body was still, almost too still, and it was opened up. I had worked in a hospital long enough to know the signs of an autopsy, but this was different. The chest was cracked open, but it wasn't just for an autopsy. It looked like someone had been taking something from it. There were tools I didn't recognize, and what was worse, Dr. Albright was standing next to it, working silently. His hands moved with purpose, as though this was some routine procedure. But it wasn't. It couldn't be. I held my breath, my hand pressed against the cold wall. I wanted to turn away, but I couldn't. What was he doing? Why was he cutting into that body like it was nothing? And why did the body look so fresh? It was too new. It didn't make sense. I had to get out of there. My heart was pounding so loudly I thought it might burst from my chest. But before I could leave, Dr. Albright turned, and for a brief moment, our eyes met. I froze. A cold shiver ran down my spine. He didn't say anything, just stared at me for what felt like an eternity. And then, with the same calmness that he always had, he simply turned back to the body, as if nothing had happened. I didn't stay long enough to find out what came next. I ran, as fast as I could, my mind racing. I didn't know what I'd seen, but I knew it was bad. Too bad. And I knew whatever was happening in that room was only the beginning. I couldn't shake the image of that body on the table. No matter how hard I tried, it kept playing in my mind over and over. The look on Dr. Albright's face, so calm, so unbothered. It didn't make sense. There was no logical explanation for what I'd seen, and I knew if I told anyone, they'd think I was losing it. But I couldn't forget it. I couldn't pretend like nothing had happened. The next day, I tried to go back to work like everything was normal, but nothing felt normal. I'd glance down the hall, and there would be Dr. Albright, as always, calm, focused, walking past me with that same unshakable composure. He never said a word to me after that night, and I didn't dare approach him. But I couldn't stop wondering, what was he doing? Why was he cutting into those bodies? And more importantly, where were the organs, the body parts going? Who was he taking them from? A few days passed, and I noticed something strange. The patients who had been cured, those miraculous recoveries, were starting to act different. At first, it was small things. They were quieter, more withdrawn, but then it grew worse. Some of them seemed to be fading, like their personalities were vanishing. It was as if they weren't fully themselves anymore. I started asking around. Other nurses had noticed it too. One of them, Sarah, pulled me aside in the break room. "I don't know what's going on," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder to make sure no one was listening. But I saw him. I saw Dr. Albright with a patient in the supply room last night. He wasn't just treating him. He was taking something from him. I felt my blood run cold. "What do you mean, taking something?" Sarah shuddered. "I don't know exactly, but I saw it. He was removing something from the patient. I don't know if it was an organ or, God, I don't know what it was, but it didn't look right. It was wrong." I couldn't speak. My mind was spinning. What was happening? Was Dr. Albright using the patients to harvest body parts? And if so, why? What could he possibly want with them? That night, I decided I had to know more. I couldn't stand by and let whatever was happening continue without understanding it fully. So, I did what I should have done from the beginning. I followed him again. I watched from a distance as Dr. Albright made his way down the hall, his usual calm stride. This time, though, I wasn't going to let him out of my sight. I waited outside the supply room, holding my breath, hoping he wouldn't notice me. My heart was pounding in my ears, but I couldn't stop now. I had to see what he was doing. I waited for what felt like hours, but then I heard the soft creak of the door opening. I stepped back into the shadows, pressing myself against the cold wall. I could hear the faint sound of voices coming from inside, but the door was only slightly open. I couldn't see much, but I could make out Dr. Albright's figure standing over something, or rather, someone. The dim light from inside cast long shadows, but I could still make out the shape of a body on the table. There was a low, muffled sound. I couldn't tell if it was a grunt or a moan. I strained to hear, and then I saw it. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't know what to do. Should I run? Should I call for help? But I couldn't. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the horrific scene unfolding before me. It was clear now. Dr. Albright wasn't just curing patients. He was experimenting on them, harvesting their body parts. I didn't know why, but the idea of it made my stomach turn. And the worst part? The patients who had been healed by him, they weren't the same. They were fading away, becoming shells of who they once were, as if whatever part of them had been taken was never going to come back. I needed proof. I had to gather something to show the others. I couldn't let this go on. I couldn't keep running from this. I had to confront Dr. Albright before it was too late for anyone else. But I didn't have any real evidence. No one would believe me just based on what I'd seen. I needed something concrete, something I could show to the authorities, something that would make people realize that the miracle doctor they were all praising was anything but. I spent the next few nights watching, waiting, hoping for another opportunity. The fear gnawed at me, keeping me awake at night. What if he was getting away with it? What if no one believed me? Then, finally, the chance came. One evening, Dr. Albright was alone in the supply room again, the door ajar just enough for me to slip inside without being noticed. My heart raced as I crept through the halls, trying to stay as quiet as possible. I had a small camera with me, nothing fancy, just enough to record what I needed to see. My hands shook, but I forced myself to steady them. This was it. I couldn't back down now. I pushed the door open gently, just wide enough to slip inside. The room was dimly lit, and I could see Dr. Albright standing over the table again, but this time, he wasn't alone. There was a man on the table, a patient. I could tell by the gown he was wearing. But something was different. The man was moving. His eyes were wide open, and he was struggling against something. Not against Dr. Albright, but against the restraints on his arms and legs. I pressed my back against the wall, trying to stay hidden in the shadows. My breath caught in my throat as I watched Dr. Albright work. He was so focused, so calm. But it wasn't just a routine procedure. He was cutting into the man's chest, pulling out pieces of his insides, his organs. It wasn't like he was performing surgery. He was taking things from the body, removing them slowly, with no care for the patient's life. The man on the table wasn't screaming, but I could see the desperation in his eyes. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But I stayed. I needed this. I needed to know that I wasn't imagining things. Dr. Albright's hands moved deftly, and I could see the body starting to lose color. It was fading, growing pale, like the life was draining out of it. I felt sick to my stomach. This wasn't a doctor healing people. This was something far darker. Far worse. I forced myself to stay quiet, pulling out my phone. My hands were trembling, but I pointed the camera at Dr. Albright, recording everything I could see. I couldn't capture everything, just bits and pieces. But it was enough. It was proof that no one could ignore. I backed away from the door slowly, trying not to make a sound. I needed to get out of there before he noticed me. But as I was turning to leave, I heard it. The soft click of the door closing behind me. I spun around to see Dr. Albright standing there, blocking the exit. My heart stopped. His eyes were locked on mine, cold and unblinking. There was no surprise in his expression, no anger, just calm. "I see you've been watching, nurse," he said, his voice smooth, almost too smooth. "You've been a little too curious for your own good." I backed up, but there was nowhere to go. The hallway behind me was empty, the lights flickering like they were about to go out. I have to report you," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I know what you're doing. People will find out. You won't get away with this." Dr. Albright didn't move. He didn't even blink. His gaze was like ice, and I felt like I was being suffocated by it. "I've been getting away with this for years. Nurse, I'm not going to stop. You should have stayed out of it." I didn't know what he meant by years. Was this part of some bigger operation? Or had he been doing this all along, hidden in plain sight? I didn't have the answers, but I knew one thing for sure. If I didn't do something now, he would keep going. He would keep using those patients, taking their bodies, and nobody would ever know the truth. But then, before I could react, Dr. Albright did something I wasn't expecting. He smiled. It was slow, sinister. "I'll let you leave," he said, stepping aside. "But you'll never prove anything. You see, Nice, you're the one who's been watching, but you haven't been listening. You're already a part of this." I didn't understand what he meant, but I didn't care. I ran. I ran as fast as I could, not looking back, not caring if he chased me. I made it to the security office and handed over the footage. The hospital's security team was shocked, but they didn't hesitate. They called the police. By the time they arrived, Dr. Albright was gone. There was no trace of him anywhere. The hospital had gone into lockdown, but it was too late. The evidence was gone. The bodies had been moved. And Weiss, the people who had been cured, they were no longer there either. The police searched the entire hospital, but all they found were empty rooms, missing records, and no sign of Dr. Albright. It was like he had never existed. I don't know how long I'll be haunted by the things I saw. I don't know if anyone else will ever know what happened at St. Margaret's. All I can tell you is this: if you ever hear about Dr. Gabriel Albright, don't trust him. And if you find yourself in a hospital where things seem too good to be true, ask questions. Because there are some cures that come at a cost too high to pay. Dr. Albright was holding a long, sharp instrument, but it wasn't for any ordinary procedure. He was cutting into the patient's arm, slowly, deliberately, and with each slice, I could see the body twitch as if the patient was still alive.